I was standing at a fish market in the Philippines, watching a man wrap tilapia in banana leaves, when it hit me that 6 months earlier, I had been standing in a superstore in Winnipeg, staring at a salmon fillet I couldn't afford. Not because I was broke, not because I had made bad decisions with money. I had worked for 34 years as an electrician. I had a pension. I had savings. I had done everything they tell you to do. But somehow, at 63 years old, I found myself putting the salmon back in the case and reaching for something cheaper. And I remember thinking, this isn't how it was supposed to go. My name is Lawrence. I retired 2 years before any of this happened. My wife Sandra and I had raised 2 kids in a house we'd owned for 27 years. Our son lived out west. Our daughter lived 40 minutes away with her husband and our 2 grandkids. We were settled. We were comfortable. Or at least, I thought we were. For most of my working life, I hadn't paid much attention to groceries. Sandra handled most of that. I'd go along sometimes on weekends, push the cart, complain about how long it took, carry the bags inside. That was my contribution. I never looked at receipts closely. We were a 2-income household, and then, when I retired, we had the pension, and Sandra still worked part-time at a dental office. We were fine. Then Sandra retired too. I don't think either of us understood what that would mean for the monthly numbers, until we sat down with our bank statements in January. It was one of those conversations you keep putting off because you know it's going to be uncomfortable. We spread everything out on the kitchen table. Income on one side, expenses on the other. Heating costs, property taxes, car insurance, home insurance, prescriptions, the phone plans, the internet, and then groceries. Sandra looked at the grocery total for December and said, "That can't be right." I looked at it too. It was right. We had spent just over $1,900 on food that month. December? Sure, there's Christmas. There are extra things you buy. But even in September, even in a regular month with no holidays, we were sitting around $1,500. For 2 people. 2 people in their 60s who didn't throw dinner parties anymore, who weren't feeding teenagers, who made coffee at home instead of buying it out. I asked her what she thought was driving it. She said everything. Everything had just gotten more expensive, and we hadn't really noticed because when you're both working, you're not paying that close attention. You just swipe the card and move on. But now we were paying attention. I started going to the grocery store with her after that, not to help carry bags, but because I genuinely wanted to understand where the money was going. The first time I walked through that superstore with fresh eyes, I was almost embarrassed. Chicken breasts had gone up significantly from what I remembered paying years before. A block of old cheddar that Sandra bought every week was close to $14. Bread, orange juice, canned tomatoes. Nothing exotic, nothing unnecessary. Just the things we had always bought, and every single one of them cost more than it used to. We started cooking more deliberately, less waste, fewer things that came in boxes. Sandra found ways to stretch meals. I got competitive about it, actually. Started timing my trips to catch markdowns. Drove to a different store across town if something was on sale. And for a few weeks I felt like I was winning. Like I had figured out the game. Then the property tax bill arrived. Then the car insurance renewal came in the mail and was $300 more than the year before. Then our furnace needed a part replaced, and the technician charged us $640 for 2 hours of work. I remember sitting at the kitchen table again that evening after the furnace guy left. Sandra made tea. Neither of us said much for a while. Then she said, "I feel like we're just treading water." And I knew exactly what she meant because I had been feeling the same thing for months. Just hadn't said it out loud yet. This was supposed to be retirement. We had saved for this. We had planned for this. And instead of feeling free, I felt like I was managing a slow leak. Every time we patched one thing, something else started dripping. Property values going up sounds like good news until you realize it means your taxes keep climbing. The dollar buys less every year. Heating a house through a Manitoba winter isn't cheap. None of it was going to get easier. I'm not a man who complains much. I was raised not to. My father worked shifts his whole life and never once said a word about it being hard. But I will tell you honestly that winter, I started asking a question I had never asked before. Not what am I going to do, but is this it? Is this the next 20 years? That question sat with me. One evening in February, Sandra had gone to bed early, and I was sitting in the living room with the television on, but not really watching it. I ended up on my laptop looking at something else entirely and fell down a rabbit hole of videos about people who had retired abroad. I don't even remember what I searched. Something about cost of living, and one of the videos that came up showed a Canadian couple, maybe a bit younger than us, walking through a market in the Philippines. Fresh vegetables piled up everywhere, fish, fruit. The husband was talking to the camera about what they spent on food in a week. I almost clicked away. I had heard these kinds of videos before. People trying to sell you on some dream. Expat content that makes everything look like a vacation. I was skeptical. But something about this one was different. They weren't selling anything. They were just talking. The wife was laughing about something that had gone wrong that week. It felt real. I watched the whole thing. Then I watched another one. I went to bed around midnight. I didn't say anything to Sandra about it. I wasn't sure why. Over the next few weeks, I kept coming back to those videos. I started watching more. Couples, retirees, people who had made moves to different countries in Southeast Asia. The Philippines kept coming up. Something about it made sense to me, though I couldn't fully explain why. The language was part of it. English is widely spoken there in a way it isn't everywhere else. That mattered to me. I was 63, not 25. I wasn't looking for an adventure that required me to learn a new alphabet. One evening, Sandra came into the living room and glanced at my screen and said, "What are you watching?" I told her. I waited for her to roll her eyes. She sat down. She watched for about 20 minutes without saying anything. Then she asked me to send her the link. I did. She watched 3 more videos on her own phone that night, right there on the couch beside me. Neither of us said the thing we were both starting to think. A few days later, she brought it up at breakfast. Not dramatically, not as an announcement. She just set down her coffee mug and said, "I've been looking at it more. The cost of living difference is real. It's not just the food, it's everything." I said I knew. She said, "I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just saying it's worth looking at properly." I said I agreed. That conversation lasted maybe 4 minutes. But it changed something between us. It went from a thing I was watching alone on the internet to a thing we were both considering, and that felt significant. What followed was a few months of the most thorough research I have done since I was trying to decide whether to switch pension plans back in 2007. Sandra made a spreadsheet. I'm not the spreadsheet type, but she is. And she went through everything methodically. Rental costs in different cities, healthcare options for foreigners, visa programs, what we could realistically expect to spend each month versus what we were spending in Winnipeg. She cross-referenced multiple sources. She found forums where Canadian retirees in the Philippines talked candidly about what actually cost what. Not the rosy version, the honest version. What we found was this: if we were careful, not extravagant but not miserable either, we could live a comfortable life in a mid-sized Filipino city for roughly a third of what we were spending in Manitoba. Maybe less. And the things that were expensive back home, healthcare costs above what provincial coverage handled, heating, property taxes, car insurance, most of those either disappeared or became manageable on a fixed income. Our daughter, her name is Melissa, she was the first one we told. We sat down with her and her husband over dinner one evening in April. I think we both expected some resistance, and she gave us some because she's protective and she had our grandkids to think about. And the idea of us being on the other side of the world was not easy for her to hear. But she listened. She asked good questions. How would we handle medical emergencies? What about flights back if something happened here? What was the visa situation really like? And we had answers, because Sandra had done the research and I had spent enough evenings reading other people's experiences to feel like I understood the realistic picture. Melissa didn't say she was happy about it, but by the end of the night she said, "I can see why you're thinking about this." And that was enough. Our son took it easier, which surprised me. He called a few days after we told him, and he said, "Honestly, Dad, I've been worried about you two, about whether retirement was going to feel like enough." He said he'd rather us be somewhere we could breathe than staying put just to be geographically close to people who could fly to visit us anyway. That conversation I didn't expect. I had to get off the phone and go for a short walk after. There were other people who weren't as understanding. A couple of friends thought we had lost our minds. One of them sat across from me at coffee one morning and said, "Lawrence, you're 63 years old. Why would you uproot everything?" And I understood why he was asking. If someone had told me 5 years earlier that I'd be making this decision, I would have said the same thing. You get comfortable. Comfortable is safe. The familiar feels like security. But I had started to wonder whether the familiar was actually costing us more than we realized. Not just money. The cold. The maintenance of a house we no longer needed the size of. The way winter had started feeling longer every year. The way retirement wasn't turning out to feel like rest. There was a night, about a week before we made the final decision, where I lay awake for a long time. Sandra was asleep beside me. The furnace was running. Winnipeg in late spring still means cold nights, and I kept thinking about something my father had said to me when I was maybe 30, back when I was working too much and not paying attention to the things that mattered. He said, "Son, the years go faster than you think. Don't spend them on the wrong things." He passed away in 2019. He never got to do the retirement he deserved. He was planning to slow down, and then his health said otherwise. And then it was too late to slow down into anything. I thought about him that night for a long time. In the morning I went downstairs and made coffee. Sandra came down a bit later and we stood in the kitchen and I said, "I think we should do it." She wrapped both hands around her mug. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think so too." It took another 3 months to actually get on the plane. Those 3 months were not easy. We had a house to sell, furniture to go through, decisions about what to keep, what to give to Melissa, what to donate, what to let go of entirely. Every drawer you open has something in it with a memory attached. Every room has a version of your life sitting inside it. I am not an emotional man in the obvious sense. I don't cry easily. But I will say that the afternoon we handed over the keys to the new owners, I sat in our car in the driveway for a few minutes before I could drive away. Not because I regretted it, because it was real now. Every plan we had made, every spreadsheet Sandra had built, every nervous conversation with Melissa, all of it had led to this moment, and there was no backing out of it anymore. And I needed a minute with that. The flight from Winnipeg with a connection through Vancouver took most of 2 days with the layover included. I'm not a great flyer at the best of times. I get stiff, I don't sleep well on planes, I overthink things at 35,000 feet. Sandra slept for a solid 5 hours somewhere over the Pacific, and I watched 2 movies I didn't absorb and stared at the flight map and wondered for probably the 100th time if we had done the right thing. I didn't have an answer. I just had the plane. When we landed, the first thing I noticed was the heat. Coming from Winnipeg, that kind of warmth when you step out of an airport is physical. It hits you in the chest. Then the noise, the movement, the motorcycles and the vans, and the whole busy pulse of it. It was nothing like anything I was used to. The first few weeks I kept trying to measure everything against home. I couldn't help it. The grocery store was different, the traffic patterns were different, even the rhythm of the day was different. In Canada, I was up at 6:30 because that's what decades of getting up for work had done to my body. Here the mornings were slow, and the afternoons were slow in a different way, and the evenings had their own pace. It took me longer than Sandra to stop fighting that. She adapted faster than me. She always has. Within the first 2 weeks, she had found a market she liked. figured out which vendors had the best produce, started picking up a few words of the local language. I was still in my head, still comparing, still measuring. Then something shifted. I can't point to a single moment. It was gradual. I stopped noticing how things were different from Canada and started noticing how things actually were. The mornings really were extraordinary. Warm air, the sounds of the neighborhood, coffee that cost almost nothing and tasted better than the $12 a bag stuff I used to grind at home. The market had tomatoes that tasted like tomatoes. That sounds small, but it wasn't, not to me. We found a routine. Not the same routine as Winnipeg, a different one, and slower. We walked more, we cooked together more. Sandra was less stressed in a way that was visible on her face, and I say that not because she was ever miserable back home, but because I could see the difference now that the comparison existed. There was something she hadn't been carrying before, and now she wasn't carrying it anymore. Melissa flew out with our 2 grandkids for 2 weeks in October, about 5 months after we had arrived. I was nervous before they came. Nervous that she would see something wrong with the decision, something we had missed, that she would come home worried about us. What actually happened was this. On day 3, we were sitting outside in the late afternoon. The grandkids were doing something in the garden. Sandra was making something inside. And Melissa sat beside me and said, "Dad, you seem different." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Lighter." "You seem lighter." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not sure she expected me to say anything. But I thought about that word for a few days afterward. Lighter. And I understood it because I felt it. The particular weight of a certain kind of life. The weight of maintenance and management, and keeping up with all the costs and the cold and the relentlessness of it. That weight had been so familiar that I hadn't known it was there until it was gone. I want to be honest here, because I think these kinds of stories sometimes leave things out. There are real things that are harder here. Medical care is not the same as what we had access to at home. There are days when I miss the Tim Hortons on McPhillips, which is a ridiculous thing to miss, but I miss it anyway. The internet isn't always reliable. There have been moments when something was lost in translation, and I felt the frustration of not knowing how things work yet. Moving to another country at 63 doesn't mean you've found an escape from difficulty. It means you've traded one set of difficulties for a different one. But here is what I know about that now. The difficulties here feel manageable in a way that the difficulties back home had stopped feeling. The heat I can handle. The internet outages I can handle. Not understanding something about the bureaucracy here and having to figure it out, I can handle that too. What I had started to feel in Winnipeg, in the deeper sense, was that no matter how hard I worked at managing things, the floor kept shifting, costs kept rising. The pension that should have been enough wasn't quite enough anymore, and I could see the trajectory, and the trajectory wasn't going anywhere comfortable. Here, the trajectory feels different. Not easy, not without its own uncertainties, but sustainable in a way that matters to me. Sandra and I have worked out what we spend. I know a lot of people want to know the real numbers, and I understand why, because I wanted to know them too before we came. We are 2 people living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in a smaller city, and we are living comfortably, not luxuriously, on less than half of what we spent in Winnipeg. That includes food, utilities, transportation, a monthly budget for health expenses, and money we put aside specifically because we want the cushion. We still have our Canadian savings and the pension, and for the first time in several years, we are not watching those accounts move in the wrong direction. There are people who would argue with that math. There are people in the comments of videos like this one who will say it's not realistic, that we are leaving something out, that life here is harder than the footage makes it look. Some of those people are right. Some of them have had genuine bad experiences. I'm not telling anyone that the Philippines is the answer for every Canadian retiree. I am telling you what happened to us, and what happened to us is that it worked. Some mornings I sit outside before Sandra is awake and drink my coffee and think about nothing particular. That probably sounds unremarkable. It probably sounds like something I could have done in Winnipeg in July on a good week. But here it happens regularly. And in Winnipeg, even in the good weeks, I had learned to use every quiet moment to mentally run through the list of things that needed doing or paying or deciding. I had stopped knowing how to just sit. I know how to sit again. My daughter calls us twice a week. Our son calls on Sundays. Melissa sent me a voice message 2 weeks ago that said, "I told my friend about you and Mom, and she said your parents sound like they figured something out." And I laughed at that, because I don't think we figured out anything that grand. I think we just stopped waiting for the right moment and decided that if we didn't try this, we would spend a long time wondering what would have happened if we had. There are still hard things. There are still bad days. There are still moments when I wonder if we made a mistake, though those moments are fewer now than they used to be. Life does not become simple just because you change the backdrop. But the last time I stood in a market here, a man was selling mangoes that had been picked that morning, and I bought a whole bag of them for less than $2. And I walked back along a street I'm starting to know, and the air was warm, and I could hear Sandra starting breakfast from the window of our apartment, and I thought about that superstore in Winnipeg, and the salmon fillet I'd put back on the shelf, and how that small defeated feeling had started a question that eventually led me here. I didn't expect retirement to feel like this. I thought it would feel like subtraction. Less work, less doing, less purpose. Instead, it feels like something was added back that I didn't know had gone missing. I can't name it exactly. Space, maybe. Room to remember what we actually like. Time that belongs to us instead of time we're squeezing between obligations. We got on the plane not knowing if it would work. It worked. That's the whole story, and I'm still in the middle of it. And honestly, that's the best part.